So, as Dan said, I'm one of the ADs at SALT. I've been in SEO, especially the agency game, for about 6 years now, on agency side. Within those 6 years, I guess I've identified a bit of a passion or more general interest around the strategy aspect or the campaign aspect within that. So what I thought I'd do ties in quite nicely with the talk that I'm doing today. So for me, what I want to do is explore organic growth strategy. So within that, we'll be looking at what actually makes up a growth campaign, what those elements look like in terms of how we run one, and also the sort of the timeframes and the frameworks within there as well. So in terms of, I guess, the individual elements that make up the core of an overall growth campaign. So in terms of what we'll be covering today, we'll be looking at the campaign planning. This is what we'll be looking at, actually identifying the purpose of the campaign, so the initial starting point. We'll then tie that in with campaign relevancy. So this is where we just want to understand what is specifically needed or what frameworks in the campaign level will require to get the best results. Then look at an actual campaign start, so establishing a starting point. So what do we need to get started and what does that actually involve? Moving on from that, it's then looking at the campaign focus. So for me, this is perhaps one of the things that can sometimes get overlooked with any campaign. We've already got the start identified. We know where we're starting, what the starting point is. We're then looking at the end goal, so what client success looks like. And it's that little bit in between where we get there. For me, this is the bit that needs to be ramped up. So we'll be looking at what actually we can do to drive continuous growth, what activities that may involve. And then finally, it's looking at the campaign impact and success. So I guess for me, with any good campaign, there's two elements to it. The first element is being able to actually drive success, so drive the performance. But then the second element, which can sometimes be overlooked, is the way we actually communicate that to clients or internally within businesses if we're internal SEOs. So the way we portray success. So in terms of campaign planning, like I said, this is the actual understanding of the context, so what we actually plan it for. So yes, in terms of identifying a purpose, one of the questions that you may want to start with is why do businesses actually engage with SEOs, whether this is internal or external. So sort of a couple of some of the key points that we tend to see. Again, there'll be lots of others, but these tend to be the four main ones. Maybe due to bespoke technical consultancy, so things like migration frameworks. It could be technical auditing, so technical audit frameworks. It could be things such as paid speed analysis or mobile usability analysis as well. Lots of different reasons. Secondly, it could be the actual platform specialisms. So this is where you may have slight generic strategies, but if you've got that second layer of knowledge around platforms, as we all know, a lot of platforms have their own specific quirks or issues. You may be aware of them. So it means that you can tailor your strategy to get around those issues. So basically it means when you've got a list of things that you want to do from a campaign perspective, you've not got then a second layer that says, we can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. It means that we're aware of it and we can work around it. And then I guess this may be more relevant to external SEOs, but it could be just general industry exposure. So if you're doing some interesting case studies around whether it's platforms or just general technical SEO studies, it could be the reputation you gain from these and the interest that that raises. On top of that, it could be actual blog content. So if you're writing blog content which answers specific questions people may ask, or if those people land on those pages, they're going to engage because it's quite interesting and very relevant to them. I think fundamentally, though, that all the above, we can tie that into the desire to grow and succeed. I think every campaign will have started, every purpose will be different, so there'll be different reasons for starting. However, being able to show growth and value is always going to be quite a big key to that. So in terms of campaign relevancy, so now that we've sort of addressed the purpose of the campaign, we now want to align that with the most attractive or most relevant campaign structure or framework, which will help us achieve that end goal. So what I've done here is, I guess I've broken it down by two of the most prominent sort of structures that we tend to see. So the first one being e-commerce SEO. So one of the big things with an e-commerce campaign is we need to look at the benchmark. And when it comes to e-com side, the majority of the benchmarks will be against either sales or revenue maximization. This might not always be the case, but it tends to be. So as an SEO, it's key that we align any activity we do in that campaign. Let's say, for example, it's keyword optimization or keyword strategy. We align that with actual commercial impact that we may have. So if we've got two areas of the site that we're looking at, we want to be going for the area that's going to drive the maximum revenue, if that is what the original benchmark is. In order to do this well and with the right detail, we need to understand not just what products drive revenue, but also how that correlates within more of the business structure. So what products actually provide the highest markup. So there's a difference between obviously just generating general revenue, but then correlating that with targeting products that make profit, so hence have strong margins. The best way to deal with this, we find, is by talking to actual product teams. These are the people that will in and out of the product performance on a day-to-day basis. They'll be fully aware of the pricing, any long-term pricing strategies or changes that may come into play. And they'll also be aware of product life cycles, which we'll cover shortly. So yes, some of the things that we're looking at on a monthly basis when we're running an e-commerce SEO strategy. Number one being conversion rate fluctuations. So again, it's not exactly SEO related as such, but it will impact SEO figures. So it's something we should really be aware of. So this could be from things that are out of our control. So it could be due to, for example, lack of competitiveness. We may not be offering free delivery anymore where our competitors are. And the reason for this is if we're seeing fantastic traffic growth, we just want to make sure that that's reflected in revenue growth, because even though it's out of our remit or out of our control in some situations, we want to make sure that we keep an eye on it, so that if there's anything we can do or suggest to align traffic growth with revenue growth, we're doing so. In terms of things we can do to tie this in with click-through rates and just general click-throughs into the site, we can look at different schema options such as pricing, stock levels that we've got, and offers, and promote those. So again, pay attention to what's been in SERPs and what the competition are doing. And moving on, one of the things there is looking at new product lines being introduced, and they may replace previous products which have been, I guess, halo products from an organic perspective. So version 1 is now moving into version 2. What this means for us is, I guess, we need to be aware of the value version 1's provided and how we pull that opportunity, especially if it's been discontinued, and move that into version 2. Or it may be the case that version 1 will still be sold. So then we need to look at, we've got two very similar products. We need to perhaps identify how users get the value out of them both, and then start to dissect that so that we can merge or separate the keyword campaigns around it where relevant, and just plan for that in the long term. Again, like we've already covered with profit margins in each product lines, this is where we talk to the product teams, just identify the difference between sales revenue, product margins. So a little bit of a makeshift pie charts at the bottom there. It's not always the case that the product that drives the most revenue actually provides the most profit. So again, it's a bit of a wider business discussion to understand what markups are made on each product and where that focus should be. As you can imagine, in an ideal world, we'll be targeting both areas. And then finally, it's about planning for the long term. So as the way we live maybe changes, for instance, in this current situation, it may impact our buying behavior. If that gets impacted, then it may impact the products we buy. So it's not just a case of looking at it from an organic perspective as to the keywords used to purchase products or to come through to purchase products, but also just keeping an eye on what products are in and out of trend and adjust the strategy in line with that. So the next framework that we look at is lead generation, or I guess enterprise SEO. So the majority of success within this campaign may be benchmarked against, I guess, not just overall inquiries that we drive off the back of it, but also the quality of the queries that come through. So, for example, in terms of things we need to look out for within this strategy, it could be, let's say, start with keyword strategy. So we need to align our keyword strategy on capturing different search intents. So to the right, I've done a little quick makeshift conversion funnel there, just as a bit of an example. So as you can see, we've got 3 different circles. For me, there are 3 different users with 3 different intents, and they'll be entering the site at 3 different levels. So we'll have someone that may come in with a research-based query, someone that may come into the site through an engagement question, and someone that may come in through the site based on a reassurance question, so that last final question before they're ready to convert. Once we identify those, we can then split out those keywords and align that to different areas within the sales funnel, which then ties us nicely into the next point, which is how we align that to our supporting content strategy. So what we need to make sure there is, now that we've identified the keywords that different users are coming in at in different areas of the conversion funnel, that the landing page offering we currently have aligns with those and captures all those queries where required. Another thing we can look at is the actual optimized landing page funnel. So a bit of an example for myself, really into my car detailing, love it. That's what I do most weekends at the minute, so there's not much else to do. So obviously you can imagine I Google lots of how-tos and different guides on different websites or car detailing websites. These car detailing websites also sell the product. So what I'm quite surprised about is, for example, when I may land on a blog post that tells me how to use a DA polisher to do a 2-step paint correction. It's very rare that I find a link in there pointing me to the actual DA polisher used in that example, which, because I've seen it, because it's like what you've learned with, you feel comfortable with, you're more inclined to purchase it. So again, this example, for me, it's wherever we've got blog posts or informational posts, if they're talking about a specific segment, whether that's product-based or service-based, it's making sure that they're pushing users on that content into that conversion funnel and then eventually that commercial page. The other level, so the fourth point in here would be the data collation. So part of this strategy is to keep monitoring the questions potential buyers or prospects are asking and adapt our strategy on a monthly basis to capture that and push forward in capturing that. So for me, the best way to do this is to actually talk to the sales teams. So a bit like with the e-com strategy, it's talking to product teams. With enterprise or lead gen, it is looking at sales teams. So the reason we talk to them is because of all the people that will talk to customers more than anyone else, it tends to be sales. What that means is they'll have a great idea around the questions prospects or clients are currently asking. And more importantly, the answers they're actually looking for. By talking to the sales teams, we can take those learnings, take that information, and focus that back into that landing page strategy and basically enrich the copy on that content to answer, again, the top right, that funnel, all those questions those people may be asking as part of that conversion funnel. And then finally, it's all about looking at continuing to review and improve that conversion journey. Again, it's not fully SEO related, but anything that helps with conversion, it can be attributed to SEO or organic activity that we're doing, is going to be beneficial. So just, as we're working through the site, just keep an eye on that conversion journey and see if there's any improvements that you've seen, or when we're doing competitor analysis, if there's any improvements that we can make. So moving on then, now that we've identified, I guess, the actual purpose of the campaign, we've looked at the framework we now need to use to get the most out of it, so the most relevant structure. It's now about getting started. So for this, it's looking at, where and how do we actually get started with the campaign. So for me, it's about looking at the starting point. So in terms of establishing a starting point, you may be looking at these 4 points here. So the first point there is looking at working backwards. So if we've got a client, what we need to do is understand what success within that campaign may look like in, let's say, 6 months' time, 12 months' time, or 2 years' time. Once we've identified what success looks like in the client's eyes, or if you're an internal SEO in the business's eyes, you can then start to work backwards, establish that starting point, and understand what is required to get there. For me, just a bit of a tip, I guess, with the more longer term projects, I think it's always good to have milestones, whether that's external or internal. It's just good for us as SEOs to monitor how our progress is driving forward. And if there's anything that needs to change, if we're not hitting a milestone, then we can understand why that is. Because obviously the longer a project is, sometimes the lack of clarity that could be there. And the longer the time progresses, the more diluted it may become. So it just keeps everything on track and moving forward. Alongside that, we've got benchmarks. So I guess setting the benchmarks. So again, whether you're internal or external SEO, you'll probably be expected to look at setting certain benchmarks. So these may be looking at areas of the site and segmenting that based on performance. It could be hard set KPI focus. So it may be rankings growth in X amount of time. It could be traffic growth. It could be end value growth, so e-commerce side of things, so revenue, and the lead gen side of things, or completions. And I think for me, with every campaign that I've run, there's always been, it's not a hard set KPI, but it's one that makes a lot of people smile. So for me, this one tends to be the competition. Even though it's not expected or it's not written down, I tend to find that where we've got a key competition, which some of the clients that I've worked with, I tend to find they can be very maybe over passionate about competition. For example, let's say there's one particular competitor in mind. What we need to make sure is that if we do surpass that performance and we, the activity we've driven puts us in a place above the competition, if we send that round and let the client know, that can sometimes send quite a lot of smiles, which is always good. And then off the back of that, once we've looked at KPIs and what selected benchmarks may be, we can actually start to see if they're achievable or not. So for me, this is looking at, can we actually achieve the KPI in A, that set period of time, but more importantly, B, any time at all, even if time wasn't a limit on that, can we actually achieve it? So Dan has actually built a really good tool called TEBcat, which we'll come on to shortly. And and that helps us align those KPIs with what's achievable. And then finally, it's about setting the strategy. So we've now identified the purpose, we've now looked at the framework that we require, we now understand what the starting point is, so what success will be like in that set time frame. Now it's about taking that framework, tailoring it based on that vision of success. So just like any technical campaign is never the same, this is exactly the same with any growth campaign. And you'll also find that as a growth campaign progresses, it changes more and more. So one of the internal frameworks that Dan's built, which has been extremely useful, is something called TEBcat. So this stands for Traffic Estimations by Category. So what this basically does, it allows us to understand traffic potential and then also understand performance based on keyword segments. So the way it does this is it correlates current ranking positions of a website, aligns that with average click-through rates, and then correlates that further with existing search volumes of those phrases. So two of the most important graphs that spits out is if you look to the right, you'll see traffic opportunity, and then under that, you'll have ranking opportunity. So the traffic opportunity allows us to quickly see what traffic we're currently capturing within that segment or within those set of phrases if hypothetically everything was in position 1. So how far away are we? How much more traffic opportunity is there? Below that, we're then looking at current ranking spread. So within that segment of keywords, it then will show us where our current ranking opportunity is. So if everything's more towards page 1, it may take us a bit longer to move that to the top 3 positions, for example. However, if everything's on page 5 or 6 onwards, it may take us longer to push that forward because it's so far back. The sweet spot might be on page 2, for example. If we've got medium search volume phrases, then we know there's immediate opportunity there to push forward with. So then just moving down in terms of what our usages for this framework are. As I've discussed, it gives us quite a realistic, or not guaranteed, because it's, data does change, but it gives us quite a realistic insight into taking it back to the KPI, if traffic growth is realistically achievable or not. So by this, I mean, let's say that the client wants X amount of traffic. However, we know from doing a TEBcat that even hypothetically, if everything was in position 1, it would only drive this amount of traffic. Then we have quite a good understanding as to if we're going to hit that KPI or not. Moving on from that, it also allows us to prioritize keyword segments based on traffic opportunity. So if we're only got the resource, let's say, to target 2 or 3 key segments out of 6, it allows us to quickly segment those out and look at where the immediate opportunity is based on current ranking performance and the traffic it may generate off of improvements. And then finally, it just gives us quite a quick overview as to the current ranking spread. So the benefit of that is we can then start to dissect what direct optimization activities may be required to drive those ranking positions forward. For example, is it page 1 focused, is it page 2 focused, and so forth. So moving on to another framework that we built internally as a team, it's called what we call the organic growth matrix. So the organic growth matrix basically is an internal framework that pulls all key organic performance metrics from things such as Google Analytics, Google Search Console, tracked ranking data, and third-party ranking data into a framework, and it aligns very nicely. We can tie in each individual landing page against the organic value being provided. So I think the big thing with this is it's all API driven, so it's all automated, and it's also set to run at certain time periods, for example, quarterly. The biggest usage for this, because there's quite a few, for example, content audits or content evaluation audits, but in this case, looking at it from a strategic perspective, is that we can straight away go in and understand the current spread that we've got. So if we look below, we've got things such as it's not ranking, it's got low traffic, high ranking, low traffic, low ranking, high traffic. It will automatically segment all our current landing pages into those buckets based on set metrics we pull together. And then from that, with those areas or buckets, we can then start to interject with bespoke and direct strategy to push them forward. So the main focus here is to look at high performers on a quarterly basis and look at how we drive other pages into that. So growing the amount of pages currently contained within the high performance section. So moving on then, now that we've established a framework we want to use, relevancy, we now want to move into that campaign growth. So this is looking at basically that month-on-month growth that we all strive for. So like I was saying before, this comes down to the start of a campaign and the success metrics at the very end of the campaign. This is that bit in between. For me, sometimes this is where things can maybe get a little bit lost or things can dilute into other areas, whereas in terms of a growth campaign, this is where things need to be ramped up and attract very aggressively. So what I'll cover in this section is basically how do we actually achieve continuous growth. So it's not set in stone. There's lots of different areas or elements to it. Some stuff is out of our control, but I thought I would go through is some of the things that we do on a monthly basis to strive for growth. So I guess there's three key areas that we always focus on. First one being page 1 and page 2 focus. So we always need to monitor and focus on a page 2 keyword opportunity, which again pulls us back to TEBcat and what's that showing us. We tend to find that as we focus on groups of keywords, things that may be out of the remit originally, so that may be on page 4 or 5 onwards, can sometimes start to pull in naturally, simply based on us driving overall relevancy signals. So by focusing on page 2 opportunity, we're constantly keeping an eye on that and feeding that. So it's being directed into page 1 based on us focusing on it. I think another idea with that as well is that when I come to review meta, it's always good at looking at capturing the before and after. So as we all know, as SEOs, it's sometimes impossible to capture every single phrase we want to target. However, one thing I've always noted myself is before we engage in an activity where we're not tracking phrases, it's always worth looking at doing sort of third-party data dump, for example. Because I've seen it a few times and been caught out myself in the past where the last thing we'll do is optimize for phrases that aren't in your core campaign to then come to 3 months down the line when they've seen great growth, but you can't prove whether they were at the original starting point. So it's always worth mentioning that as well. Moving down into the second element, so this is top 20 landing page focus. So again, tying it back to that e-commerce side of things and the growth conversions around the lead generation. I think the core element to this campaign or structure is looking at the top 20 pages that provide value and then continue to focus on those on a monthly basis. So by this, it may mean looking at the page 1 or 2 focus, looking at what new keywords are coming in, drive that forward again. Or more importantly, it could be looking at new keywords. So we like to look at the top 20 landing pages by performance. And then within that, we'll do keyword research around those areas on a regular basis to look at what new opportunities are being pulled in and what we can capture. And then finally, moving down, looking at competitor audits. So I guess there's 3 areas to this. The first area being is just it's quite top level in terms of analysing, interpreting what our competitors are doing at keyword level. So what phrases they're ranking for, what positions they're ranking in, and what's the search volume like, and what pages are ranking for those phrases. The second element to that is then we can start to dissect what segments they're clearly focusing on. So if we've got bunches of keywords that are very high search volume and very high performance, and there's a single URL that's being pulled in, it may be that this is where their main focus is. So especially when we tie that into an e-commerce campaign, we can tie that into product focus. So if there's a range of products that we've got, we're focusing on products A and B. Yet when we look at the competitor data, it seems to be that they're focusing on products C and D. Then it may be that they know something we don't know, and we may want to do a bit of research around that and pull that into our strategy. And then finally, something I do on a regular basis, just a top navigation review. So it's basically just chucking the navigation of the website into Excel, mapping out links, and then the pages those links are pointing to, correlating that against our competition, and then just looking at the overall comparison. So I've found in the past where we've got a site that maybe have quite a few dynamic pages within the top navigation, competitors got nice static pages that are optimized. Straight away, quick win there is to look at those pages, get them made static, and then start driving forward with a strategy based around optimization. And then just moving on, regarding the continued growth, just some of the areas that we look at and some of the things that I've picked up on over the years. So looking at full meta optimization, I know that we use rules a lot of the times. I think it's always good to look at when it comes to our core pages or key pages to optimize those on an individual basis. It's quite surprising when you look at keywords, when you swap a few things around or add plurals in objectives and things like that, how different the search volume is, how different the SERP is. So when it comes to core pages, to optimize those on an individual basis is always recommended. I think for me as well, when I'm running campaigns, it's always to get the balance between where we are with that campaign. If it's a fresh new campaign, then the emphasis may be on generating short-term growth or showing short-term improvement. That way we secure trust and then we can start to plan for the future a bit more. So it's worth looking at overall search volume and keywords we're targeting versus current ranking position. So if there's a bit of a compromise between positions 11 to 15, where there may be medium to low search volume, but quite low competitiveness, we know that we'll be able to make some tweaks to drive those forward quite quickly and show growth quite quickly Hence, the more longer term stuff, we've got time to then work on that and a plan around that as well. Moving into the content element. So we should obviously see the content as a bit of an extension on our meta optimization. So we want to be basically reaffirming the optimization we've got with our meta, but more importantly, we then want to look at expanding it. So as we know, we can't get every single keyword we want into the metadata. What we can do with the content is the areas that we have missed, we need to make sure that we're capturing those and adding those in that segment. And again, just something I've always seen is, I always believe there's never de-optimize to optimize. So when I'm going in and optimizing content, it's always worth looking at trying to enrich that content copy and avoid diluting it. So where you may go in and you may end up deleting phrases or deleting sentences or changing sentences, you just need to keep that in mind as to what phrases those areas may be targeting and just not to dilute those. And then, like we've discussed with e-commerce and lead generation, it's always about keeping an eye on your product or service offering. So this may change in time, so we need to make sure that we're continuing to capture this opportunity. So again, talking to sales teams, talking to product teams. And then finally, site flow. So whenever I'm doing work on a website, I always look at it from both an SEO perspective, but also just as a potential buyer. Again, like we've seen, conversion rates, although they're not specifically SEO related in some degree, it's more CRO. However, by looking at it from a potential buyer perspective as we work through a site, any changes made on the site that we're not aware of, we can pick up on. So, for example, maybe some dev work around the add to basket button. This may have knocked it out, may not be working for a bit. If we're looking at the site as a general buyer, trying things out as we work through around the SEO work, we can jump on that and can address it quite quickly. We can just get a good idea around that. So then, I guess, moving back to one of the last frameworks of this talk, but one that's had great impact so far, is the Google Search Console Keyword Matrix. So this is an internal framework, hooks up to the GSC API, and what this does is it extracts keyword impression data over a set time period. From this, we can then start to make time-related comparisons. So in the example below, we've got week 1 versus week 2, and what's the difference in impression growth there? What this does is quickly shows what keywords are showing signs of growth. So obviously, if you've got a segment and we start to see multiple keywords within that segment appear in the top 5 or top 20 queries, whatever that might be, we know something's going on there, it may be something to focus on. In terms of actual usages, so like I've just said, it helps us identify any emerging search trends based on that impression growth, and then we can start to adjust the keyword focus to capture that new growth. And then finally, a little bit more wider than SEO, it could be that we support a business on product focus. So as a hypothetical example, if you're a vehicle leasing business, you may have people that are coming towards the end of their lease agreement. So you may have people in 2 boats. You may have one that may unfortunately be in furlough position. So they're not on 100% salary, hence what they spend on a car leasing deal may change. You may have someone else in another boat where they aren't sure what the long term looks like for themselves. So again, they're not wanting to commit. So you might start to see, for example, short-term leasing phrases start to come in, then you can start to optimize around those and give guidance on the current product offering around that, those phrases as well in that area. So then moving on to sort of like the last element, I guess, of a campaign. Like I said at the start, campaign can be drilled down to sort of 2 key areas. The first area is actually being able to drive the growth, and then the second area is the way you show that growth and portray it. So to me, sometimes the key to defining success can often come down to the way it's actually presented and shown. As SEO specialists, we want any individual within a business to be able to look at the work we've done, interpret that work, and understand the value that we've driven off the back of it within minutes. And sometimes less is more in these situations. When it comes to actually demonstrating the impact, again, we can tie this back to the start line. So it may be that, some of the KPIs at the start around ranking growth, you want to be showing that. It could be traffic based on actual targeted landing pages. I've highlighted this one in yellow because sometimes a graph that's gone to 0 is never that impressive. However, if in 6 months you can close and write off the traffic deficit or trend reversal, that's a massive achievement and one that needs to be highlighted. And then finally, it could even be from a technical perspective. So if you've got a technical audit that's been going on for 6 months or 3 months, it could then be the list of the actions off the back of that, fixes that are in play. More importantly, the fact that we know we've checked those and they're now fully compliant. In terms of myself and the team, whenever we drive value, we always try to portray that and show that to a client in the best way possible. So sort of a bit of structure that I always follow, whether that's with an email, for example, to people high up in the company, or whether that is on a project management tool where it's a message to the people involved in that project. But the structure I tend to follow is, this is what we've done, this is how we've done it, this is the value that's been driven off the back of it. And I think for me, probably one of the most important points here, and it's the whole point of a continuous growth strategy, this is what we intend to do next to continue providing value and providing growth off the back of it. So this is what next steps looks like. And I've just dropped into examples here of 2 current clients. These have used everything that we've just gone through on a monthly basis as part of an ongoing growth strategy. One's been over the sort of 6-month time frame, one's been over, I think, about 16 months now. Very different clients, extremely different verticals. But again, like going back to the previous slide, sometimes less really is more in terms of showing success. So yeah, thank you. I hope that was useful.